Okay then, now that the rigging is complete, it's time to get some animation put onto this little chap so that he's ready to go into the engine. We're going to start with creating an idle cycle, which is the one that plays when the character receives no input from the player. So when they're standing still, you don't want them to be dead still. You want them to look as if they're still alive. Sometimes it is called a keep alive loop or a breathe loop as well. Now I want you to kind of suspend your belief a little bit for this, because we're going to make this robot look like he's breathing. And of course, robots generally don't need to breathe, but to make it look like he's not just dead still, we're going to create this idle cycle. So as you can see, I've got my rig open, and to make sure that I don't save over anything that I want to keep, I'm going to save it straight away as idle. So file, save scene as, and we'll call it idle. So it's going to be 12 for me. Idle cycle. There we go, save. Next up, so you can see that I think I left you with the channel box open, but in Human IK, what I want to do now is just make a change here. And so here we've got this kind of full body control. So if I just select a control and pull him over, you see the whole thing moves. And I'm going to move this over to here. And this is where we're going to do our animation. And what it means is that if we pull it over, it won't move the whole body, but it will move the whole arm. And this is just to make sure that we don't end up setting keys on things that we don't want to. It gives us a little bit more control as we're going forward. What we're also going to do is just change out of the modeling view. Now there is an animation view, so if we have a look at this. So this gives you a viewport up here and a graph editor down here. I don't really like, it's good for the graph editor, but it doesn't give me enough space here. I'm not a massive fan of that. So I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to go to Maya Classic, and that's because it gives me a timeline down here, which we'll need. And then I'm going to put a graph editor on the side. And I'm going to suggest you do the same thing. So what I'll do first of all is just go to Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor, and open one of those up. And you can see for me it's already docked to the side because that's where I tend to keep it. It might open for you in a separate window like this. If it does, just move it over to the side, like so. And then you can kind of have your views side by side, which is the way that I prefer to work. One other thing that I want you to check is that this little icon down here isn't red. So it shouldn't be by default, but this is auto key. And again, to make sure that we are in control and we don't set any keys that we don't mean to, we just need to make sure that that's off, and that'll keep everything nice and clean and organized. The first thing we need to do to get this animation going then is to create our first sort of base pose. This is how he's just going to sort of be stood. And we want this to be fairly dynamic. So I'll just start building this now. We can just make that a little bit smaller because we don't need so much of that just yet. And we'll start putting this pose together. So I'm going to start by getting the hips controller. And you'll notice I do a lot of selecting with this marquee selection and just nip the edge of what I want. I find that's a little more accurate for me. So we're just going to drop his knees down. I'll probably raise that back up a little bit later, but just to give me room to move his legs, we're going to drop his waist down a little bit. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to bring this foot forward and out a little bit to about there. And then I'm also going to attempt to rotate this out a little bit. Can I do that by moving the toe? Let's see. It's going at a funny angle. So what we'll do for that is we'll just drop into the top view. Pressing F to find that particular control. It should be that one. Let's just double check. Yeah. And then I'm just going to rotate it using this yellow manipulator here. Like that. And that will just make sure that it stays flat on the ground, because otherwise that wants to go out a little bit. Okay, then what we'll do is take the other foot, and this one's going to move back and out as well. Kind of like that. Now the thing about back feet is, generally we'll raise our heel up off the ground if that's how we want to stand. So what I'm going to do is I'll just go into my top view again, just so that I can rotate that out a little bit. And then I'm going to do some other stuff with it, and I'll probably need my other views to help me get this. So the first thing I'll do is I want to raise this up so that it looks like he's sort of using his toes there to get the extra height. And then I'll just turn the grid on so that I can get that lined up. And I think what I'm also going to do is just rotate it that way a little bit as well. So that should give that a fairly nice look. So let's have a look at how these legs are. Not bad. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to bring the hips back up, because this is kind of my up pose really. So that's not bad. I think the this foot here might just need to go back a little more. No, I don't like it further back. I think I like it actually a little bit closer in. So I think what I'm going to have to do is just raise his hips up a little bit further. And maybe just bring his hips further forward a bit as well. Oh, that's better. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do then is just try and sort his arms out. And obviously we don't want these to be stuck out the way they are. That's too much. Let's just raise them up a little bit more again. There we go. So let's get... I tend to just do these with the wrist controllers if I can. And what we're going to do is just kind of bring it down, bring it in. And this one's kind of going to be slightly back, this arm. So we're going to bring it down a little bit more. Let's just make this view a bit bigger. Bring it to that kind of position. And then there's a fairly good starting point. I'm going to get the shoulder controller and just sort of, not the shoulder, the elbow controller, just to bring that out a little bit as well. Let's see what we get. That's not a bad start. I might have to come back and refine that. And then we'll get this wrist here, and I want this one to sort of do the same thing, but this one's going to be forward a little bit. We'll bring that down, bring it in. We don't want it to be too far out. I think what I'll do as well is just rotate that hand around a little bit. Same with this one. Everything's a bit too straight there. And maybe just rotate that in. Same with this one. So you can see I'm just sort of building this pose as I go until I start to feel happy with it. And one of the views that I've got to be the most conscious of here is the back view, since that's the one that will likely see the player from most of the time. So I don't want that to get too out of control really. I think I'm also just going to rotate this a little bit so that shoulder's back and he's kind of leaning that way, and then we're just going to counteract that by bringing the head back so that's a bit more forward facing, and that should then give me a little more freedom with what I can do with this arm. Okay. So I think we'll use that as the base pose. I think that's good enough. That will do. I think I'll just make one more slight change to the fingers because they look far too rigid. So if you just select that end controller and rotate them around, you'll see that kind of does the whole hand. And then the thumbs you kind of got to rotate on two different axes. So we'll bring it in a little bit. But you can see that kind of goes up too much. So if we bring it down that way, that looks a bit nicer. And then we'll do the same for the other thumb. Make sure that I only select the one controller that I want. So I'll bring that in a little bit and take it down. Okay, so we'll say that that is the sort of base pose that we're going for, that everything else is going to be built from. What we need to do next is get things so that they actually move. So for this loop, I've decided that it's pretty much going to be a 50 frame loop. So you can see at the moment that we have 200 frames on our timeline and it's displaying 120. We don't really need to take that 200 number down, but we do need to take this one down. I'm going to just type 51. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it's a 50 frame loop and we start at 1. So it's 1 to 51 will give us 50 frames. And now we're going to start getting some movement. So let's just select the hips and check that it's doing what I want it to. Yep. So when I move the hips up and down, everything above the hips goes. That's good. So with just the hips selected, we're going to put our playhead on frame 1 and then we're going to press S on the keyboard. And what that does is sets a keyframe. We also need a keyframe setting at 51. Because this is a loop, frames 1 and 51 need to be identical to make sure that it returns back to the position it started at. And then in the middle we have frame 26. And on frame 26, this is going to be our down part of the animation. And what I'm going to do is just on the y-axis, bring him down a little bit. We don't want to go too far with this, or it starts to look a bit too much. And then we'll press S. And then if we play it, you should start to see that we've got the beginnings of this sort of breathe animation. So that's the first part of it done, essentially. The last thing we'll need to do with this actually involves the graph editor. So if I just bring the graph editor back to so it's got some space, And we'll select that hips controller again, and I'll press A. In fact, I'm going to select everything like this, and then I'll press A again, and you'll see that there are two curves here that have got some movement on them. That's represented by these lines here. And what we're going to do is make sure that this kind of happens forever. And it's not ever so important on this particular loop, but it will be important on the others. So we'll get into the habit of doing it early. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And what we're going to do is go to View, and we're going to select Infinity. And what that does is shows us what the animation does before and after the keyframes we've set. And we can have it cycle so that it keeps going. To do that, we're going to go into, let's just select everything. We're going to do Curves, Pre-Infinity, Cycle. And you'll see that that curve now is curving before we set any keyframes. And if we do the same for Curves, Post-Infinity, Cycle, that will happen forever, which is really useful to us in getting this loop, especially when we start adding offsets down the line. So that's the hips done. I'm happy with that. The next thing we'll do is grab this chest controller just here. And we're going to do the same sort of thing. So we're going to go to frame 1 and press S, frame 51 and press S, and then go to frame 26. And on this one, we want him to kind of look like he's breathing. So we'll put the rotate tool on, and we're just going to rotate him forward a touch. Not too much. We don't want this to be distracting, just enough that we can see it. And then we'll press S. And then we're going to play this to test it out. Yeah, that's really good. That's doing pretty much what I want it to do. Now, the problem with this is it all starts sort of very mechanical. And one of the ways that we can alleviate that is with something called an offset. And it kind of creates a bit more of like a wave of movement going through the character rather than it all being this sort of mechanical look we've got now. And this is fairly easy to do in this case. So if we just go to make sure that we're seeing all the curves, and we select everything like that, we're going to do our pre and post infinity. So curves, pre-infinity, cycle, curves, post-infinity, cycle. And this is really important for this one, because what we're going to do now is move these frames along the timeline a little bit. So I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard, and then I'm going to do middle mouse for this and just drag to the right, and then I'm going to move it about, what have I got in my notes? About 5 frames to the right. So 1, 2 I've already done, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that now there's no keyframe on frame 1 anymore, but it's moved to frame 6, frame 31, and actually frame 56, which we can't see here. But the reason that this offset is important is, if we zoom in on this curve, there is still some movement happening before frame 6. And that means it's going to stay even despite the fact that we've moved it on. So we'll do that with anything that we offset. That's really important. Okay, so what we'll do now is play this again and see how it's looking. And you'll see that there's a bit more of kind of a wave of movement going on because we've done the offset on the chest. So I think that looks pretty good. What we need to do next is a similar sort of thing, but this time to the head. So let's go to frame 1, and what I'm going to do on frame 1 is just select the head controller. I'm actually going to move it up ever so slightly, and that kind of creates a bit of overlapping action, which kind of looks a little bit better. So with that done, we're going to set a keyframe on frame 1, move to frame 51, set it again, and then on 26, as we've done so far, we're now going to rotate it down a little bit, and that's going to make the head look like it's got a bit of weight and like there's some effort going on. So we'll do that, and we'll just play it to make sure that that's working. Yep, that's not bad. And what we're going to do now is offset that movement. So let's just select this again. We're going to make sure that we can see all the curves. We're going to select all the curves. Let's just press A, make sure they're all showing up. Yeah. So it's going to be curves, pre-infinity, cycle, curves, post-infinity, cycle. And then we're going to do this offset. So I'm holding shift and my middle mouse button. I'm going to move this one, I think probably another 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and that's moved it to frame 11. That's perfect. So then we'll test this and see if I'm happy with it. I might decide to tweak this a little bit. Let's see. Oh no, that's not bad. Oh, I quite like the fact that his head's quite huge, and now it looks like it's got some real weight to it because of the way that we've animated it. So that's pretty good there. The next thing we need to do is just something with the hands. So I'm finding all of these bones at the moment a little bit distracting, so let's try and turn these off. So I'm just clicking this icon here, that turns off your forward kinematics. And then we've just got the controllers for inverse kinematics showing. And then we'll have a look at what the hands are currently doing. So they're going up and down. That makes sense, I'm happy with that. But I kind of want them more to look like they're staying still. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select both wrist controllers. And on frame 1, we're going to press S. And we're just going to, we'll set them on frame 51 and we'll press S as well. Okay. And then at 26, here's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to put it in this front view here. I'm going to turn on this tool here. It's called the grease pencil. And I'm just going to go to here. It'll let me make a mark on the screen. So I'm going to put one mark here. And one mark here. This tells me where those wrist controllers are on frame 51 and frame 1. So now if I move to 26, I can see sort of where they've moved to. So what I can do now, I can just turn the grease pencil tool off. I'm going to select this controller here. So this is just the character's right hand. I'm going to move it up and out a little bit, like that. And then the same with this one. So I'm moving up to about the same height, but I am moving it out a little bit as well. And we'll press S. And then what I'll do is just go back to frame 51 and remove that mark I made with the grease pencil. I can turn that tool off now. Oh, I can try to. Go away, tool. There we go. And then we'll see how that looks. Okay, so if you're paying attention, you'll see the mistake I made. I made the movement here on this wrist, but I didn't set the keyframe. So let's just make sure that I sort that out. I should know better than this. Okay, so I'll put the grease pencil tool back on. I'm going to put my mark back in. Then I'm going to go to frame 26. And then I'm going to turn that tool off. Put this roughly where I want it to be, up and out a little bit. Press S this time, and then we'll just play it. Yeah, that's not bad. I think I can get down with that. Oh yeah, right. So let's now just kill the grease pencil tool again. We'll just get rid of that. Where did I put it on frame 1 this time? Get rid of that and close the tool. And then what I want to do is get the offset sorted out. So let's just make sure that for this, you'll notice as well that there are a lot more controls on this because we've got 2 wrists to work with. So I'm going to select both of them and just click once at the top, scroll down to the bottom and shift select. That'll show me all my curves. Press A to make sure they're all showing up and select them. We're going to do curves pre-infinity cycle, curves post-infinity cycle, all good. And then we're going to do the offset, which is going to be about the same as for the head. I might do it a couple of frames before or after. We'll see how it looks. So middle mouse button and shift, and I'm going to go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's try 12 frames. Okay, we'll see how this offset looks. Not a fan of that. Let's make a little tweak. I'm just going to put the offset back a little bit. So instead of it being that far forward, we're going to bring it back a little bit. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll try that. Not really enjoying that either. We'll go further. So we'll 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That puts it on about frame 18. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so that is pretty much the idle cycle. So what I would recommend to you now is that you can go on and refine this a little bit more if you choose to. So if I wasn't trying to do this quick, I would probably put a little bit of movement on the fingers. I'd have some side-to-side movement and probably rotate things side-to-side as well, just so that it doesn't look too mechanical. Although one of the reasons we're doing this as a robot is because mechanical movement does at least make sense. So what we'll do next is we'll move on to the walk cycle, and we'll bash out a basic walk cycle as well, and then we'll be getting well on our way to having a character that we can put into the engine. So make sure that you've saved this as idle cycle, file, save scene, and then into the next step we can make our next cycle. I'll see you there. I'm able to continue making these videos thanks to the ongoing support of my amazing Patreon community. If you'd also like to support Game Dev Academy via Patreon, then check out the link in the description below. Thank you.